Most men who run into serious money trouble in retirement didn't make one big mistake. They made 100 small ones, spread out over years, each one reasonable on its own, each one justifiable in the moment, each one so ordinary and familiar that it never felt like a mistake at all. It felt like living, and that is exactly what makes this particular trap so dangerous. It doesn't look like a trap, it looks like enjoying your retirement. It looks like being generous. It looks like finally spending some of what you worked so hard to save. And then one day, not dramatically, not suddenly, but quietly, and with a kind of inevitability that feels deeply unfair, the numbers stop working the way you expected them to. If you've ever had a nagging feeling that your money is moving faster than it should be, even though you can't point to any one obvious reason why, stay with me. Because by the end of this you'll know exactly what that trap is, how it works, why it catches even careful men, and what you can do right now to make sure it doesn't catch you. I want to start with a man I'll call Martin. Martin retired at 64 after 31 years in the same company. He had done everything right, saved consistently throughout his career, contributed to his pension, built a modest but real investment account, paid off his house, kept his debts manageable. He had planned carefully, spoken to a financial advisor twice in the 5 years before he retired, and walked into retirement with a clear picture of what he had and what he needed. He was ready. By any reasonable measure, Martin was ready. The first year of retirement was wonderful. He took the trip he and his wife had been talking about for a decade. A real trip. 2 weeks overseas, the kind they'd always put off because there was never enough time or enough money or enough of both at once. They visited their grandchildren more often. They renovated the kitchen, which had been needing it for years and which they'd always deferred because work was busy and weekends were short, and the kitchen functioned well enough even if it didn't look the way they wanted. They gave their son some money to help with a down payment on a house. Not a large amount, but meaningful. Because Martin could, and because watching his son own something felt like one of the rewards of all those years of working, Martin felt good about all of it. He felt like a man who had worked hard and was now enjoying the fruits of that work, which was exactly what he was supposed to be doing, which was exactly what retirement was supposed to look like. It wasn't until the end of the second year, when Martin sat down to review his accounts the way he always did in January, that he noticed something that made him go very still. The number was smaller than it should have been. Not alarmingly smaller, not in a way that signaled immediate crisis, but meaningfully smaller than his plan had accounted for. Smaller by an amount that, when projected forward across the years he expected to need it, created a gap between what he had assumed and what was actually there. Martin went back through 2 years of spending, the way a man sometimes has to do something he's been avoiding before he can understand what it actually says. What he found was not one big mistake, it was many small ones, each justifiable, each ordinary, each the kind of thing that, described individually, sounds completely reasonable. The trip, the kitchen, the son's down payment, the new car, because the old one was 8 years old and he didn't want to deal with repairs, and he'd earned it, hadn't he? The memberships he'd joined because retirement meant he finally had time to use them. The more frequent restaurant meals because cooking every night wasn't how he wanted to spend his retirement. The grandchildren's Christmas that was bigger than usual because everyone was finally in the same place for the first time in 3 years. None of it was reckless. All of it was real. And together it had moved the number further than Martin's plan had accounted for. I didn't feel like I was spending a lot, Martin told me. Each thing felt right at the time. It wasn't until I added it all up that I understood what I'd actually been doing, and by then I couldn't undo any of it. Martin's situation was manageable. He adjusted. He made changes. He was going to be all right, but the adjustment required sacrifices that he hadn't planned to make. Things he'd looked forward to, deferred, choices narrowed in ways that didn't feel good, in a season of his life when he'd expected his choices to be expanding. That experience is what I want to help you avoid, because Martin is not unusual. He is in many ways the rule rather than the exception. Careful men, well-prepared men, who walked into retirement with a solid plan and found themselves 2 or 3 or 5 years in looking at numbers that didn't match what they expected, not because they were reckless, because the trap is real and it is subtle, and it catches people who never saw it as a trap at all. The stories I share today are composite illustrations, patterns drawn from many real lives, shaped into something recognizable. They are not about any one person. And nothing in this video is financial or legal advice. These are reflections from a long life and many conversations, offered so that you can see the pattern before it catches you. Let me walk you through exactly how the trap works. The first layer of the trap. The early retirement surge. There is a pattern in retirement spending that financial researchers have documented and that almost nobody talks about in plain language. In the early years of retirement, roughly the first 3 to 5 years, people tend to spend significantly more than they will in the middle years of retirement. This is not recklessness. It is entirely predictable and in many ways entirely natural. You have just been given back your time. After decades of structured days, of showing up somewhere for someone else's schedule, of deferring the things you wanted to do because there was always something else that had to come first, suddenly the time is yours, all of it, every morning, every week. And the natural response to that freedom is to use it, to travel, to renovate, to replace the things that had been on the list for years, to be generous with children and grandchildren in ways that working life didn't always permit. To celebrate the retirement itself, the anniversaries, the birthdays, the occasions that feel more precious now that time feels more precious. None of this is wrong, but here is the problem that nobody explains clearly before you retire. The money you spend in those first years comes from the same pot as the money you will need in year 20 and year 25, and the years after that, when the spending will be different, quieter, less travel, less renovation, but when the need for security and medical coverage and the ability to handle unexpected expenses will, if anything, be greater. A man I'll call Robert retired at 63, healthy and energetic, with a plan that made sense for a man of 63. He and his wife spent the first 4 years of his retirement doing the things they'd always said they would do. Genuinely wonderful things. A cruise, a cabin in the mountains they rented for a month every summer, generous gifts to their grandchildren, a kitchen remodel that turned into a bathroom remodel that turned into a screened porch because they were already disrupting the house and might as well finish it. Robert wasn't frivolous. He checked his accounts. He watched the numbers, but he was checking the numbers against the plan of a 63-year-old man, in the early flush of retirement, doing the things early retirement is supposed to include. What he wasn't doing was checking them against what a 78-year-old man would need, what an 83-year-old man would need if his health required ongoing care, what his wife would need if she outlived him by a decade, as the averages suggested she might. I was spending like the beginning, Robert told me, not like the whole thing. That phrase stayed with me. Spending like the beginning. The beginning is real. The beginning is earned. The beginning should be enjoyed, but the beginning is not the whole retirement. And the money spent in the beginning cannot be in 2 places at once. The first layer of the trap is the simple, human, entirely understandable tendency to front-load the spending in a way that makes the later years harder than they needed to be. Not because of one big decision, because of many small ones, made when the freedom was new and the account still looked large and the later years felt far away. They are not far away. They are coming on the same schedule as everything else. The second layer of the trap. The home you own now fully owns your attention. There is a particular phenomenon that catches many retirees that doesn't get discussed in financial planning conversations nearly enough. The house. For most men of our generation, the house was the project you kept deferring. The kitchen that needed updating, the roof that was aging, the driveway, the deck, the garage, the electrical panel that had been on the list since you bought the place, the landscaping you always meant to address. During your working years, these things waited, not because you didn't see them, but because weekends were short and money was already committed to other things and the house functioned well enough even when it didn't look the way you wanted. retirement changes the equation in two ways simultaneously. You now have time to notice everything that needs doing, and you now have access to savings that previously felt committed to the future but now feel, in the warmth of the present, like resources available for the projects that have been waiting for years. The result is something financial planners call the home improvement surge. And it can represent a very significant, very rapid movement of money that was earmarked for retirement security into walls and floors and roofs and appliances and landscaping. A man I'll call Gordon retired at 66 into a house he loved. He and his wife had lived there for 22 years. They knew every room. They were attached to it in the way that people get attached to places where important things happened, where children grew up, where holidays were held, where a life took shape. And in the first 3 years of retirement, Gordon fixed everything. Not extravagantly, not wastefully, but completely. New roof, new HVAC system, kitchen renovation, master bathroom, deck rebuilt, new water heater, landscaping overhauled, new windows throughout. Each project had a reason. The roof was genuinely old. The HVAC had been on its last legs for 2 years. The kitchen had needed updating for a decade. The deck had become a safety concern. Gordon was not being irresponsible. He was taking care of a home he intended to live in for the rest of his life. Every expenditure was defensible, but together, they consumed a portion of his retirement savings that his original plan had not accounted for. Because his original plan had not fully reckoned with the fact that a 22-year-old house would require 22 years of deferred maintenance to be addressed, and that retirement was when he would finally have the time and the money to address it. I knew the house needed work, Gordon told me. I didn't know how much work. You don't know until you start pulling things apart and finding what's underneath. The home is not a trap to be avoided. It is where you live. It requires maintenance, but it deserves to be in the plan, explicitly, as a real line item with a real number attached to it, based on a realistic assessment of the home's age and condition and what it will realistically require over the years ahead. Not an afterthought, not something handled from whatever's left. A deliberate, anticipated, budgeted part of the financial picture, because the home will demand attention. The question is only whether that demand comes as a planned expense or as an unwelcome surprise. The third layer of the trap, the invisible cost of upgraded everyday life. This is the subtlest layer of the trap, and it may be the most pervasive. When you retire, certain things change about how you spend your ordinary days. You eat at home more often, but you also eat out more often, because you have time for lunches and dinners that working life didn't accommodate. You shop for groceries differently, more fresh food, better cuts, the things you always meant to buy but rushed past. You replace things sooner because you notice them more now that you're home. You buy the better coffee because mornings are yours now and the morning routine matters. You buy the nicer wine because dinner has become an event rather than just a meal you get through before going to bed. You subscribe to the streaming services and the magazines and the club memberships because your time is your own and filling it well matters to you. None of these things is a mistake, but each of them represents a small, quiet upgrade to everyday life that, spread across 12 months, adds up to more than most people account for. A man I'll call Victor was meticulous about his major retirement expenses: travel, home improvements, gifts. He tracked those carefully. He knew what they cost. What he didn't track was the accumulation of small daily and weekly decisions that quietly inflated his cost of living over the first 2 years of retirement. The extra restaurant meals, not fancy, just more frequent. The grocery bill that was running noticeably higher than it had during his working years, for reasons he couldn't entirely explain. The memberships and subscriptions that had seemed individually small and had collectively become a meaningful monthly expense. The more frequent online shopping because he had time to browse now in a way he hadn't when work consumed his days. I wasn't living extravagantly, Victor told me. I was just living a little better, every day, and every day a little better adds up to something real over time. He was right. It does. The upgrade to everyday life is one of the most natural responses to the freedom of retirement. You have time, You want it to feel good. You make small choices consistently that make each day a little nicer than the day before. But small choices made consistently have large effects over long periods of time. This is not an argument against making your days enjoyable. It is an argument for knowing what your enjoyable days actually cost. Not approximately, not roughly, but actually, and making sure that number fits inside the financial reality of the retirement you've built. The fourth layer of the trap. Inflation is patient, and it never stops working. Here is a reality of retirement that is easy to understand in the abstract and surprisingly easy to underestimate in practice. Inflation, the gradual, steady rise in the cost of goods and services over time, does not retire when you do. It continues, every year. Quietly and consistently, it erodes the purchasing power of a fixed income in ways that are invisible month to month and significant decade to decade. What costs a certain amount today will cost more in 5 years, more still in 10. The specific rate varies, the direction does not. And for a man on a fixed retirement income, a pension, Social Security, distributions from accounts that are no longer growing the way they did during working years, this means that the same income buys less every year in ways that compound slowly and become more significant as time passes. A man I'll call Lawrence retired at 65 on what he had calculated carefully and correctly was enough to live comfortably. His pension and Social Security covered his essential expenses. His savings provided a cushion and the ability to travel and give occasionally. The calculation was sound. At 65, at 75, Lawrence was feeling a pressure he hadn't anticipated, not a crisis, but a persistent sense that the money wasn't going as far as it once had, that expenses that had once felt manageable now required more attention, that the cushion was being used not for travel and gifts but for groceries and utilities and healthcare costs that had simply become more expensive. Inflation had not been dramatic, it had been patient, it had simply continued to work, every year on an income that was not expanding to match it. My father used to say, "A dollar isn't worth what it used to be," Lawrence told me. I heard that my whole life. I just never applied it to myself. I never really calculated what it meant over 20 years of retirement. Here is what protects against this layer of the trap. First, knowing it exists, naming it, not assuming that the financial picture of today will be the financial picture of 10 years from now, because inflation guarantees it will not be. Second, building inflation into the plan, not as a footnote, but as a core assumption. What does this cost today? What might it reasonably cost in 10 years, in 15? Third, keeping enough flexibility in the financial structure that rising costs can be accommodated without crisis, which means, above all, not spending every dollar of income and every dollar of return in the early years when the cushion is largest. The goal is not to be afraid of spending. The goal is to spend in a way that accounts for the fact that the same spending will cost more every year going forward. The fifth layer of the trap. The family expenses that were never in the budget. This layer overlaps with things we've discussed elsewhere, but it deserves its own place in this conversation because it shows up in the retirement spending picture in a specific and particular way. When you retire, something changes about how your family relates to your resources. Not always, not in every family, but in many. During your working years, your income was understood to be committed to the mortgage, to savings, to the expenses of running the household, to the ongoing business of a working life. There was never an obvious surplus. There was never an apparent pool of available money that wasn't already accounted for. Retirement changes that perception. The mortgage is paid, the savings are accumulated, the working expenses are gone. To the people around you, including people who love you and mean you no well, your retirement looks like the moment when the resources became available, and so the requests come, from adult children facing expenses they can't fully cover, from grandchildren needing something for school or for a start in life, from family situations where a gift or a loan seems like the natural expression of the resources you now visibly have. A man I'll call Eugene retired at 64 with a plan that he had genuinely thought through. It accounted for his living expenses, his travel, a realistic estimate of his home's maintenance needs, healthcare costs as he aged. It did not account for his son's divorce, or his daughter's business that needed capital to survive a difficult year, or his grandchild's medical situation that required out-of-pocket expenses the family wasn't prepared for. Each of these things happened within 4 years of Eugene's retirement. None of them were predictable. None of them were the result of irresponsibility on anyone's part. They were simply life, the random, unscripted, frequently expensive nature of life, showing up in the lives of people he loved. And Eugene responded the way Eugene had always responded. He helped, because that is what fathers do. The problem wasn't that he helped. The problem was that the help was never in the plan. I planned for my life, he told me. I didn't plan for their lives, and their lives are connected to my resources in ways I hadn't fully thought through. The protection against this layer of the trap is not refusing to help your family. It is building the expectation of family expenses into the plan, not as specific amounts for specific events because those cannot be predicted, but as a general category. A realistic retirement plan acknowledges that the unexpected family need is not actually unexpected. It is the expected form of the unexpected. It will happen. The only question is when and in what amount. Having a designated understanding of what you can give in what circumstances, without compromising your own security, that is not selfishness. It is the planning that makes genuine generosity sustainable over the long term. What protecting yourself from the trap actually looks like. I've spent most of this video describing how the trap works. I want to spend the rest of it talking about what protection from it looks like in practical terms. Not complicated protection, not protection that requires a financial background or a professional toolkit. Just a few habits, practiced consistently, that change the trajectory in ways that matter. The first is this. Know the difference between your fixed expenses and your variable ones. Your fixed expenses are the ones that don't change much month to month. Housing, insurance, utilities within a normal range. These you can know precisely. Write them down, add them up. That number is your floor, the minimum your life costs every month no matter what. Your variable expenses are everything else. And this is where the trap lives, because variable expenses feel flexible, and they are flexible. They can go up or down based on what you decide. But that flexibility cuts both ways. The discipline is reviewing your variable spending monthly, not annually, monthly. Because the trap doesn't announce itself, it accumulates, and the only way to see accumulation before it becomes a problem is to look at it while it's still small. A man I'll call Carl started doing this in the second year of retirement, after a conversation with a friend who had learned the hard way what we've been discussing today. Carl pulled up his bank and credit card statements for the previous 3 months and went through every single charge. Not to feel guilty about anything, not to restrict himself, just to see. What he found was not a crisis, it was information. A restaurant spending pattern that was higher than he'd realized. A series of online purchases that, individually unremarkable, collectively added up to something he hadn't consciously approved. 3 subscriptions he'd forgotten existed. He made adjustments, not painful ones, just deliberate ones. It was like finding money I didn't know I was losing, Carl told me. Not a lot, but enough. And month after month, enough adds up to something real. The second habit is building irregular expenses into the annual picture. This is the one most retirees skip. The trip you're planning, the home project you know is coming, the holidays, the grandchildren's birthdays and graduations, the irregular medical costs. These are not surprises. You know they're coming, even if you don't know the exact amount. Build them into the annual plan. Estimate conservatively. Set money aside monthly for the annual expenses, so that when they arrive they are funded, not drawn from the regular monthly budget in a way that throws everything off. This is how you prevent the situation where December feels like a financial emergency despite the fact that December has appeared reliably in the calendar every year for your entire life. The third habit is the most important of all, and the simplest to state. Know what the plan is for this retirement, not the plan from when you retired. The current plan, reflecting where you actually are and where you actually need to get to. Plans change, life changes. The spending in year 3 looks different from the spending in year 10. The health picture changes. The family situation changes. The things that matter most to you change. A plan that isn't revisited becomes a plan that no longer reflects reality. And a plan that no longer reflects reality is not a plan. It is a document from the past, providing the illusion of structure to a present that has long since moved on from it. Revisit the plan once a year, preferably with a qualified financial professional who can look at the full picture with fresh eyes and a clear head, not to be told what to do, to understand where you are and where the trajectory is pointing, and to make adjustments while there is still time and flexibility to make them comfortably. So let me bring this together. The spending trap that catches retirees every year is not a single thing. It is a series of layers, each one ordinary, each one human, each one entirely understandable in isolation. The early retirement surge, the natural, joyful, well-earned desire to use the freedom that retirement represents. The house, the accumulated deferred maintenance of a lifetime, finally being addressed. The quiet upgrade to everyday life. The small, consistent choices that make each day a little better and that add up to something real. Inflation, patient, invisible, working every year without rest. The family expenses that were never in the plan, because the plan was for your life, not for the unscripted financial needs of the people connected to your life. None of these things is a character flaw. None of them is foolishness. They are the natural, predictable patterns of a real retirement, lived by a real person. Patterns that catch careful men because careful men were never warned about them specifically enough. Now you have been. And what you do with that warning is up to you. What I'd encourage you to do this week, not this month, this week, is sit down with 3 months of your actual spending and look at what it actually says. Not to judge yourself, not to restrict yourself, just to see. Because you cannot manage what you cannot see. And you cannot protect what you don't fully understand. The trap only catches you in the dark. If something in this video felt familiar, if you recognized your own situation in any of these layers, I'd be glad to hear from you in the comments. And if you've found your own way through one of these patterns, I'd love to hear that too. Because the men watching this aren't just receivers of information, they have wisdom of their own. And sometimes the most useful thing one man can offer another is a simple, honest account of what he learned the hard way. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.